Uh, this is our 23 sessions we have. Our super spreader seminars was previously bi-weekly, and from now on we shifted to a monthly base. Thank you all for joining us. First of all, as always, let's have land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land the Omni-Reunis Network head office is located on York University, recognize that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as the Toronto has been taken by Anishpek nations, the Huron-Tsung Confederacy, and Huron-Wendat. It is now the home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current territory holders, the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Vanput Belt Convent, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Super Spreader Seminars series stands as SSS, welcomes faculty members, the Omni-Reunis affiliates, and highly qualified personnel, HQPs, including postdoctorals, researchers, and graduate students, to showcase their research, promote their ideas, share their research experience, and establish connection among the various branches of the network. It is a platform to spread scientific knowledge about the One Health research framework and the research progress of over 30 Omni-Reunis HQPs within network scientific research community. This seminar facilitates knowledge exchange within Omni-Reunis, the emerging infectious disease modeling network, and collaborating scientific community. Okay, we have today Joseph Baafi. Thank you, Joseph, for accepting our invitation. Joseph is actually one of our organizers, actually the lead of the team of organizer of Omni-Reunis Super Spreader seminars. Joseph received his master in mathematical science from African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. It stands as AIMS, AIMS, and an M.Phil in applied mathematics from Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. He is currently a PhD candidate in theoretical biology lab at Memorial University of Newfoundland under the supervision of Dr. Ain Mahbel. Sorry for pronunciation, Hurford. His research interests are in mathematical epidemiology and population biology in ecology, focusing particularly on climate dependence. For his talk today, he's going to talk about modeling the impact of seasonality on mosquito population dynamic, insight for vector control strategies. He's going to talk about mosquito and its infectious disease. The burden of this disease is different in different regions, being highest in tropical and subtropical areas, which have high annual rainfall and warm temperature and less pronounced seasonality. The life cycle of mosquito consists of 4 different stages, and as each of these stages has different mortality rate, and seasonal weather may affect the population dynamic of mosquitoes, and they just they have considered seasonal temperature and rainfall pattern and describe the stage structure for these mosquitoes, and they understand without considering the seasonality, there will be overestimation or underestimation for abundance of mosquitoes. Let's hear it from Joseph. And thank you all for joining for today. Joseph, thank you for accepting the invitation. I will stop sharing. Could you please share your slide with us?
Yeah, sure. I'll share in 1 second. Can you see my slides?
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Sanas, for the great introduction, and thank you all for joining today's seminar, Super Spreader Seminar Series. My name is Joseph, as was mentioned, and in the next couple minutes, I'm going to discuss with you my research on modeling the impact of seasonality on mosquito population dynamics, insight for vector control strategies. So let's get into it. This is the outline of my presentation. So I'll be discussing the background to this study, and then I'll focus on mosquito life cycle and their feeding dynamics. And then I will discuss the objectives of my research, the modeling approach I am using. Then we'll see a couple of results which I deem it interesting and that might be interesting to you as well. Then we'll see a conclusion of the presentation. All right, so for the background, I'm talking a little bit about vector-borne diseases in general. So vector-borne diseases continue to pose a significant threat to human health, particularly in the African region. Now, vector-borne diseases generally account for more than 17% of all the infectious diseases that we can think of. And so it's really an alarming thing that needs serious consideration. Now, most vector-borne diseases are either caused by parasites or bacteria or viruses. And focusing on malaria, malaria is a parasitic infection that is mostly transmitted by the Anopheles mosquitoes. And we're talking about the female Anopheles mosquito. The other mosquito-borne diseases as well, like the dengue disease, is a prevalent viral infection, but it's mostly caused by the Aedes mosquito. And there are so many other mosquito-borne diseases. We can talk about the chikungunya fever, the Zika virus fever, the yellow fever, West Nile fever, and so many of them. Now, when somebody is infected, these are some of the symptoms the person shows. You might have fever, chills, sweating. You'll be cold, but at the same time sweating. So that is interesting. Vomiting, diarrhea, kidney failure. People have severe headaches, back pain, at times convulsion, and it can even lead to coma. Now, interesting, I'm saying that don't ignore malaria symptoms because it could be very fatal. Malaria kills. And so I'm going to show you statistics of malaria deaths by world region. Now, if you take a keen look at this figure here, well, you see a serious issue in the African region. Quite a large number of people die from malaria every year. I mean, every part of the world have their share, but the bigger issue is in Africa. And it's interesting to know that most of the deaths occur in children under the age of 5 years. And at times pregnant women, mostly because they don't have much immunity to the parasites. And so this is an interesting area that requires further investigation. Now, the main agent which transmits the parasite or the virus that causes the disease, we focus on malaria, so we're talking about the parasite, is the mosquito. And so this is specifically the female Anopheles mosquito. This is how the transmission is done. It bites for blood meal, and then is able to infect the host. And mostly, as I've been saying, it doesn't only bite you and give you the Plasmodium parasite, but it also leaves really irritating debris on your skin. And so if you look at the figure that I have there, this is really irritating, and the other side too. So it doesn't only give you the disease, but it gives you irritating things that you have to battle with. And this is the life cycle and the feeding dynamics of the mosquito. I will start with the adult population. The adult mosquito will lay eggs. So we're talking about the female adult mosquito. And for the purpose of this research, I'm limiting myself to the Anopheles mosquito that causes malaria. It lays eggs mostly on swamps or water bodies, around water bodies, areas that can be flooded, like stagnant waters and so on. And then depending on environmental conditions at the time, the eggs develop or hatch into larvae. Then the larvae continues to the pupae, and then the adult emerges. And once the adult emerges, the male and the female mate to get the eggs to fertilize. And then once eggs are fertilized, the adults go to seek a host where it can get a blood meal. And so again, for the purpose of this, I'm limiting myself to the human host, but the female mosquito can also get blood meal from livestock, camels, and the likes. So it goes to the human host, and then once it encounters a host, biting takes place. Now, mostly after they bite, they need a couple of time to get the eggs to develop. And so they isolate themselves. And then they find, once the eggs are developed, they find a good place to oviposit or lay the eggs. And that the cycle continues in that order. This is how mosquito feeds and also the life cycle. Now, one interesting question has been whether weather affects mosquitoes. And there have been a lot of research in this area, which shows that weather factors can predict or affect mosquito breeding and the viral diseases they also spread. And so in 2012, there was this paper published by he et al., which was trying to forecast dengue incidence in Singapore. So they tried to compare mean temperature and then rainfall with dengue cases, reported cases. And the figure shows clearly that there are some kind of correlation between these environmental factors and the number of people who are reporting sick. Now, Wang, Ogden, and Zhu in 2011 also published this paper trying to collect mosquitoes by through traps in the Peel region of Ontario. This study was done between June and September. Of course, the other months are the winter months, so you don't get much mosquitoes. And they did this for 2002 to 2009. And you could see clearly that there's some kind of seasonality in the data they collected, giving the impression that weather kind of affects mosquito activities and their population dynamics. And that is where my objectives are coming from. So I want to understand the mosquito state structure dynamics due to seasonality, and then also to study the duration of periods of low abundance, to understand peak abundance and regional differences. Now, I'm also interested in obtaining insights that can inform effective vector control strategies. Because if you really understand how weather affects mosquito dynamics, then we can really have insight on how to control them. Now, let's go into the modeling approach. So I consider a state-structured OD system which kind of merge the life cycle of the mosquito and then weather influence on the life cycle. And so all the parameters in this model are either influenced by temperature or rainfall or both. And so, for example, in the egg stage, the eggs hatch into larvae by a certain parameter which is dependent on temperature and rainfall, and that continues. Some temperature depend on the temperature of the times. some eggs are not able to make it to the larvae stage, so they die because temperature. And then from larvae to pupae, and then to the adult stage. Here, I try to divide the adult stage into different parts, like you saw in the previous slide, where the adults emerge from the pupae, goes around seeking for host. The one that is successful in getting a host isolate for a while, go to the resting state, and then when the eggs are fully developed, it goes to oviposit, and so we get the eggs, and then it goes back to the adult seeking host stage. Now, I want to point out that all the parameters here are based on data from lab experiments. I didn't make them myself, so people have done this, and then we use them to estimate the parameters. Now, because the bigger issue of malaria is in Africa, I thought it interesting to look into some regions in Africa, how the weather there is influencing mosquito population dynamics. And so I considered these 4 regions in Africa. Ain Mahbel is Nigeria, the northern part of Africa. And then in the Eastern Africa, I went to Nairobi, Kenya. And then in Cape Town, South Africa, and then I also took data from Ghana. So these are temperature and rainfall data, fit functions to them. And then I put into the model to understand how the weather differences affect mosquito population. I estimate parameters based on these temperature and rainfall values that I got from these different regions. So these are examples of the parameters I'm using. So I have the egg laying rate and then the mortality rate for different stages anyway. Now, all the development rate depends on the 2 environmental conditions, temperature and rainfall. And so we use data from lab experiments to estimate these parameters. I created these figures from the data in Algeria, so that's why I put it up there. Now let's go into discussing a few results. Now, so the x-axis here is for months in the year. And then on this figure, the y-axis is also discussing the mosquito abundance, specifically the adult mosquito abundance. And the red horizontal lines here are just running the model with constant environmental conditions. I put all environmental conditions to constant, and then the curves, different colors represent the seasonal environmental conditions. So I'm talking about temperature and rainfall. And we can see clearly that, especially in Algeria, that ignoring seasonality in the model substantially underestimates mosquito population dynamics. If you look at the difference between the curves here and the line there, you see a significant underestimation. And so in Algeria, I have estimated annual mosquito abundance to be around 11,434 when seasonality is ignored. Now, this figure is about 10 times less than the population I get when seasonality is considered. And so it highlights the fact that considering seasonality really have impact on mosquito population dynamics. Now, on the other side, if you look at a region like Ghana, ignoring seasonality overestimates mosquito population abundance. So we see a big difference between the two. And that is similar to the dynamics we see in Kenya. And then in South Africa, it seems like the constant environmental one is an average anyway. But the point we're trying to make is that seasonality is really an important factor in considering mosquito population dynamics. Also, for each seasonal curves, we see different dynamics altogether. The dynamics that exist in Algeria is entirely different from the dynamics we see in South Africa and the other regions. Some regions peak once, others peak twice, and even others peak 3 times in the year, right? So these are some of the interesting results we find. Now here I try to understand the fraction of the larvae, the stages, that is able to make up to the adult stage, considering environmental conditions. And so, for example, if you look at the dynamics we have in Algeria, these are the fraction of larvae that is developing, or the juveniles that is able to make it to the adult stage. Now here we have low temperature and low rainfall. So around this period, temperature is very low, rainfall is very low. You see a very low fraction of the total larvae is able to make it to the adult stage. But once environmental conditions start to become favorable, so here temperature and rainfall is rising to where it gets to its peak, we see a large fraction of the larvae developing into the adult stage. And so you could see that, for example, on this figure here, around this time in Algeria, we have a very low adult mosquito population. And then we get a very strong peak somewhere in August and September, right? And this is true for the other regions. Well, the dynamic between temperature and rainfall is a big complex one, but the information we see is that they play a key role in influencing even the juvenile stages that is able to make it to the adult stages. And this has really implications in vector control. We'll get there in a couple of minutes once we get our point out. And so we see, because of the interplay between or in environmental conditions, we see different dynamics stay in the population of mosquitoes in the different regions. Now, I was also interested in understanding the distribution of mosquitoes as a percentage of the yearly total across regions. And it's very clear. I pointed out previously that for some months, like in Algeria, for some months, we practically doesn't even see any mosquitoes. And then couple of months to we see a big peak. Some regions, like in Ghana, we see 2 strong peaks, others 1 peak. So, and of course, even the numbers is different for different regions. This is all trying to give us a picture of how seasonality affects population dynamics. Now, to investigate whether controls need to be spread across the year or focus on a few periods in the year, we calculated cumulative fraction of mosquitoes. I'll take a couple minutes to explain what is happening in this figure. So on the x-axis, we have months up to rank. And so these numbers are months. So we have 1 to 12, the months of the year. And then on the y-axis, we have the cumulative fraction of mosquitoes. Now, the second figure on the right is trying to explain to us the different months here and then the different regions. So, for example, if I come to the figure on the left, for example, in Algeria, now, so I'm ranking the months. Ranking, what do I mean? The month that records the highest number of mosquitoes. And so number 1 here, the first number here is the month that the region, a particular region, records the highest number of mosquitoes. And then it continues to the 12th. So the 12th month is the month that we have the lowest number of mosquitoes. Okay, so for example, if I go to Algeria, the month where we record the highest or mosquito peaks highest is, so Algeria is in September. Number one here is in September. So September, we have a strong peak. And then followed by August, where mosquitoes have the second highest. And so if I'm interested in controlling about 50% of the entire year's mosquito population, then the suggestion is that control should be highly focused in the first 2 months where mosquitoes are higher. So for like in Algeria, considering only 2 months, we can control about 50% of the mosquito population. And those 2 months are in August and September. So you don't necessarily need to spend too much money controlling mosquitoes all over the year, but you can just target specific periods in the year. That is what the model suggests to us. So considering in Algeria, considering August and September, we can control at least 50% of the entire population. And that is similar to the dynamics in South Africa. In South Africa, the first 2 months, so the highest months where we have the highest mosquito is April and then in May. So focusing controls in these 2 months, only these 2 months, can help us control about 50% of the entire year's mosquito population, which is really interesting. Now, it's different for the other regions. For example, in Ghana, if we want to consider 50%, control 50% of the mosquito population, then we probably want to consider about 5 months. And those would be, so we have November, December, and then also in October, in May, in April. These are the months that control should be highly intensified to be able to catch about 50% of the entire mosquito population. Right, so that is what this figure, the results also show us. Now we try to compare the model estimates, population estimates, to empirical malaria death data. And we see a kind of correlation, really interesting correlation between malaria death and then the models predicted mosquito abundance. So especially in Ghana, which estimates the highest number of mosquitoes. I mean, considering the regions that we consider here, record the highest number of deaths in the year. And again, this is 5 years cumulative average. I just average within 5 years. So this is from 2015 to 2019. And then in Kenya, the second highest kind of have also significant number of people dying from the disease. But if you go to Algeria, we see a different pattern. Algeria, according to our model, simulates or predicts a significant number of mosquitoes, but it seems there's no death at all, like zero death. Let me point out that South Africa has a certain number of deaths, which is, so this is not zero. Of course, it correlates with the number that the model predicts, mosquito numbers the model predicts. But in Algeria, which seems to be even the highest number, the region with the highest number of, second highest number of mosquitoes, has zero deaths. And the reason is partly probably due to the fact that Algeria was considered malaria-free region during the period that we considered. And so the last time Algeria reported malaria cases was before this data was taken, right? So as it stands now, Algeria is considered a malaria-free region. So one point here is that we can have mosquitoes in a region, but be malaria-free. And I mean, if you read about how the whole thing came by, you see that Algeria government put a lot of effort and resources into making sure that the region becomes a malaria-free region. And so we estimate mosquitoes in Algeria quite a significant amount, but yeah, interestingly, they do not have malaria at this point. And so in wrapping up, some key takeaways here is that neglecting seasonality in mosquito models leads to significant overestimation or underestimation of mosquito abundance. And then also, depending on the region, mosquito abundance peaks once, 2 or 4 times a year. Periods of low abundance are predicted to occur for durations ranging from 6 months, as we saw in Algeria, to not at all, like in Nairobi, Kenya. And seasonal patterns of relative abundance of stages are substantially different, totally different for different regions. And then we see that depending on the region, just 2 months could account for 50% of the adult mosquito abundance, while in others, 5 months account for 50% of adult mosquito abundance. Now, we saw that the region with warmer temperatures and higher rainfall across the year, like Ghana, is predicted to have the higher mosquito abundance. The last figure I showed this clearly. And this is broadly consistent with the reported malaria deaths relative to the other countries that we considered in the study. And our analysis reveals a distinct patterns in mosquito abundance across different months and regions. And so mostly control strategies often target one specific life stage. For example, applying larvicides to kill mosquito larvae or spraying insecticides to kill the adult mosquitoes. These are mostly the control strategies we use to control numbers. Now, our findings from this study, and as we saw, suggest that differences in seasonal weather affect mosquito stage structure, and that the best approaches to vector control may differ between regions in terms of timing and the duration and the efficacy. Okay, so for some regions, we probably need to focus controls in only 2-3 months, and that we can reduce mosquito population to something very minimal, which is very different for other regions where mosquito population, control might have to be focused within 5 to 6 months before we can even manage 50% of the mosquito population. I'll end my presentation here. I want to say thank you to my supervisor, Dr. Amy Hurford, for the support so far. It's been great. And then I want to thank all of you for joining the Super Spreader Seminar Series and then making time to listen to this presentation of mine. And I thank Memorial University also. That is where I am from. We spoke about mosquitoes, and I want to ask if there are any questions. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joseph. It was really interesting and so informative. We all have enjoyed. Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Dr. Emmy Herford. If you have any question or suggestion, please write it down in the chat or raise your hand to ask. Yeah, there is some question from Dr. Emmy Herford. Yes, please.
Hi, Joseph. That was really great. Something that I thought of while you were talking that I don't know why I hadn't noticed earlier, but when you said that peak mosquito abundance in Algeria was 11,000, it doesn't really sound like very many mosquitoes for like an entire country. Are we supposed to like interpret that like per unit area, or I guess we should have thought about this a bit more, but I'm wondering if you have any insights into how to interpret that number.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, the data is for particular region like Ain Mahbel. So that is like a region within Algeria. Yeah, so I guess this is really like a kind of an inference to what is happening to the entire region, but it's mostly specific to the region in Ain Mahbel, like Algeria. So it's not necessarily for the entire Algeria like too broad, but for particular region. Yeah, but I guess it's something they didn't think much about. But yeah, it's a good point to bring it up. But of course, again, the data is not the data for the entire Algeria, is for the region that I showed, like Ain Mahbel. So these estimates are referring to those regions and not the entire country.
Yeah, I mean, I still think we need to think about it a bit more because I don't know what the population is for N
Hmm.
Mahbel, but like the number of humans is probably way, way more than 11,000. And so when I
Right.
think of like peak mosquito abundance, it seems like super dense. I don't even know what the number would be, but maybe it's easier to think about it if you interpret it, how many like mosquitoes per person. Maybe that makes it a bit
Yeah,
easier
yeah.
to understand. So I still think 11,000 for peak abundance might be really, really small, but maybe if we go back and look at how you did your parameterization, maybe we'll better understand how you're supposed to interpret that.
Right. Thank you. Hmm.
Thank you, Becky. It states really interesting presentation. Thank you, Joseph. And there is a question, Emmanuel, please. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot, knowing that I'm also from such an environment where mosquito is really an issue. I was wondering if in your characterization of your model, if you considered any confounding factors beside climate, because the other factors independent of climate that may drive the incidence of the population abundance of mosquitoes, for example, vegetation cover, uh, sewage conditions, or maybe sanitation may serve as breeding grounds for mosquitoes, irrespective of climate. So I was just wondering if probably there was a metric you introduced in your model that could account and control for the influence, so that the comparison across the different countries could be more like, as it were, not biased, because I imagine there are differences in the countries you compare in terms of the other factors other than climate that may contribute to that. I don't know if my question is a little bit clear.
Yeah, yeah, it's really clear. Yeah, and thank you for the question. Really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, coming from this angle, even with climate, I think there are even other factors that still affect mosquitoes, like even humidity, wind, and all that stuff. They all affect the vector. Again, I didn't consider all those factors in the model. So the environmental factors that I highly considered them were the temperature and rainfall. And so, like, I mean, there's more room for research in this, like considering even other climate factors, like I said, humidity, wind, and all that stuff. Now, coming back to the other side, like land use and all the other areas you mentioned, like sanitation, because other places might have a lot of stagnant waters, many gutters and tanks and all that. They all breed mosquitoes. So, yeah, those ones were not explicitly incorporated in the model. I try to introduce a parameter that controls like a kind of a intrinsic competition, like like kind of an interspecific competition among vectors. So if there are so many vectors, then some are dying because of, I mean, competing for food and other stuff, especially. So that parameter was introduced in the larvae stage because the larvae stage is considered to be the only juvenile stage that feeds, like feed. And so when there are more larvae, then of course they are going to compete for food and other stuff. So I introduced parameter into that. But apart from that, other factors were not explicitly considered in the model, which I think could be done in future work on this to improve the model much better. But again, I can kind of compare the different regions, because if I introduce it in one region and I don't introduce it in the other region, then it becomes like kind of bias. But then if I introduce some parameters, then it might be different for different regions and other stuff. Yeah, so this can be a base model to do more exploration and introduce more interesting stuff like you just said. Yeah, but again, I didn't introduce most of them explicitly. The conditions that were explicitly introduced were the weather conditions of temperature and rainfall. Yeah.
Thank you for your explanation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Yeah.
Yes, thank you both. And there is a comment in the chat by Faye. She mentioned that it was insightful and very well presented. Yeah, that is true. Thank you all. Joseph, I would like to ask a question, a minor question. It was really interesting that based on the specific month of the year, we can make policy making, and these months were completely different for different regions. And back into the correlation between abundance of the mosquitoes, malaria mosquitoes, and the death rate, there was a what is it called? Malaria-free policies. What does it mean, malaria-free policies? In Algeria, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so the government decided to kind of eradicate malaria, like kind of control malaria in Algeria. So of course that goes with a lot of work, like putting a lot of, so what the government did was to have fund, put a lot of money into that. And so once somebody shows symptoms, the person gets diagnosed and treated at no cost, like at a zero cost. And they were testing people who were coming into the country in the airport and all that stuff. And you don't have to be a citizen or a resident or whatever to receive malaria treatment. So they kind of had strict policy in place to get it to the lowest number as much as they can. And so there were a lot of work done into that. They were moving from community to community, testing people to make sure people don't have the disease, and people who had it were treated for free. They don't take anything from you. And so eventually they managed to reduce the malaria community spread to zero, right? So I think the last time they reported malaria cases was in 2013. And as I said, that is before this study. This data was taken from 2015 to 2019. So 2013 was just before, right? Yeah, so I guess the key point that I wanted to stress on is that some regions can still have mosquitoes. It might be very difficult. I don't know if you can reduce mosquito population to zero, but malaria can be reduced to zero, looking at the example from Algeria, but it requires a lot of work. But the essence of this work is to show that, okay, still we have mosquitoes and malaria. Of course, mosquito numbers kind of correlate with number of people getting sick and dying from the disease. So if you can reduce mosquito population and if you are sure of when to implement interventions like controlling the larvae or insecticide spray on the adults, we just trying to predict what times will be the best time to do this. Then we can at least reduce mosquito numbers and then reduce the number of people getting sick and eventually dying from the disease. And if I from a region like where I come from, then you really appreciate this, where you have mosquitoes chasing you everywhere you go. And yeah, that is really kind of, yeah,
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you. Your research is really practical for policy making, and we all have enjoyed. It was really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Especially the heat map for different regions, the specific each month we can apply the mitigation policies. Thank you all. Thank you, Joseph, for the interesting talk. Is there any suggestion or question? Of course, the recorded session will be posted on the Omni-Reunis website in case you want to go to the details of the slides.
It's
Thank you.
also going to be on the YouTube channel.
And thank you. Thank you, Whitney, for mentioning that. Thank you all. Thank you for joining. Hope to see you on the second Thursday of the next month and have another one for the meeting. Thank you, Joseph. It was really informative and interesting. Thank you all for joining us. If there isn't any question, let's end the meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Joseph.
Bye bye. Thank you, Joseph.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.